Okay. Okay. So so here's the thing. I did some follow-up. We didn't meet last week. But I did some follow-up on a couple of things that were left open. One, the new handout I gave out it rolls us back to Genesis 1:26 to the let us the let us, do whatever we're doing. Let us make man in our image. And we were talking a little bit about, how we picture that. Who is the us? How are they communicating? I ran across something that someone said. I thought this was good. He described it as, you got to follow this real close. He described it as them talking to himself, or talking to himself. Them talking to himself. Now I figured that was a good way to explain how the Trinity is working in that area of the let us, So it's not them talking to him, because the him is kind of singular over here. But if it's them talking to himself, it's amongst them. Anyway, I thought that was, I know, especially if you don't know the answer, if you do, like that. But anyway, just to kind of, hang on, I lost a piece of paper that I had. So he said, he said in there, he said, God, I'm just going to read these verses up to 29, I think. He says, then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish and the sea, and over the birds of the heaven, and over the livestock, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. Now, I know that we talked about this, last week, but he's projecting that we're going to do the creation, and here's what we're going to have the creation do: have dominion over all the other parts of creation. And we talked about the the male and the female, and we're going to see at the second half of chapter 2, when God revisits and retells the story of creation, and he expands the part about creating Adam and Eve. So in chapter 1, he just says it made them male and female. And, we talked about various parts of that. But we'll see how in chapter 2, we'll see how he made made them male and female. But he says, be fruitful and multiply. And this is kind of where we had left off. And I did some homework here, because I had said, God's not worried about overpopulation of the earth. Indeed, the scriptures often reiterate that children are a blessing from God. The more children, the greater the blessing. And I don't think that there was an ending point for that. So if some of you are behind schedule in the number of children, yeah. But again, see, you know what? Again, there's another thing where we buy into the culture more than we buy into the word of God, because God says more children are a blessing. May your quiver be full. And all those kind of things. And then the culture says, well, you shouldn't have so many children because of this or that, or we can't have so many because the wife has to work. And I'm not shaming anybody or anything. I'm just saying that's the way if we don't look back to the creation story, we probably miss out some on what God's original plan was. But here's where I did my homework, because when we were talking about that, I made the statement that somewhere I had read that the whole population of the United States could fit in the city of Jacksonville, Florida, which doesn't seem possible. So I looked it up, and sure enough, it can. But I found a better example, and it was with the state of Texas. We got to make Texas worth something, right? Texas has 695,662 square kilometers of space. There's 7.5 billion people in the world. So now we're including the whole world, trying to fit it into Texas, okay? And when you work it out, and anybody wants to fact check me and do their own mathematics, I'll use your figure the next time I teach the class. But the way it works out now is that each person, if it was just the United States, each person would get, what was it? I didn't write it down right. No, forget that. Would get acres, okay, if it was just the United States, okay? But here for the world, each person would get 1/40th of an acre, which is about 1,000 square feet. So you figure an average house is what, 1,500 square feet? And if you have two people living in the house, you could have that would be your 1,500 feet plus 1,500 feet of yard, which is probably around what my house is. Because my house is, what is it? 12,000, the lot, 12,000 feet. But anyway, here's the thing, is that if we did the U.S. population in Texas, it would be 27,000 people per square mile. Okay. Now, is that a big population or a little population? Huh? It's the size, it's the density of New York City. And it's less than what Paris is. Like that. So anyway, here was my point. This was my point going back to when I brought it up, is that we're not short of space for population. You know, people say, well, you got overpopulation and that. But here you could do that. Now, if we have a resource problem, it's because we don't do it right. Because where do we get the food? It just grows out of the ground. You know, God has provided that food grows out of the ground. I'd read years ago about this one guy he was telling a story about how he became a Christian. I can't remember what drove him that way. He said one day he was in a restaurant, he was going through a salad bar. And he said, and it dawned on me, all this stuff just grows out of the ground. And that, I guess, changed his thinking about, is there a God? How does God provide? Things like that. So when God says, what did he say here? Be fruitful and multiply. He's not saying we can't do that. You know, we say we can't do it. And then the crooked side, hang on a second, right? The crooked side of us steals all the resources and doesn't distribute the resources properly. So there's something there for everybody. Ray, do your microphone.
Well, 26 says, what you just read.
Thank you.
When we go to the next chapter, when the fall happened, how much of an impact did the fall have on creation and man and his wife?
Well, it made people bigger like me, so I take up more space if it were trying to fit us all in Texas. Well, then it doesn't affect the space, and I don't know, because once what's his name, Noah and his family got off the ark, first thing they did was plant a vineyard. Pardon? And get drunk. Yeah. Like that. And you go, okay, we only have to plant vegetables for 8 people. No, but but that's what I'm saying. That's the importance of the creation story, is listening to what God said, what God provided for, and that we probably need to follow that more closely. So any questions? Okay, let's move on. So let me just read these last couple of verses here. 29, it says, and God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. you shall have them for food. So let's plant more fruit trees. I mean, if we have food shortages, let's plant more, plant more vegetables. And, maybe we need to get people living in the right places where they can grow their own food instead of living out here in the middle of the desert. you know, he says, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. So not only did he provide for the food for us, he provided for the food for all the animals, the livestock, the fish, the birds, the centipedes, whatever it is, whatever they needed, God provided. So, and he says, and it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. So it says it was very good. Every element of creation has been good, which indicates that each life form was complete in itself. Yet the whole of creation was not completed until God had created an overseer to rule over the lower forms of animals. For this role, he created a special creature made in his own image. With the creation of mankind, both male and female, God pronounced that his creation was more than good, that it was very good. And I would think that if God says something's very good, and I guess he could have said it was very, very good, could have said it's very, very, very good. No, but if he says it, if everything else he's pronouncing is good, that's what he says at the end of each creation, that it's good. And then if he creates man and says it's very good, part of the very good may not just be us, but the fact that he has provided for somebody to take care of the good, which makes it very good. Do your microphone, Andy. No, but beef, eating the animals wasn't a part of the original creation. He says, I've given all the plants, all the seeds of the vegetables and the fruits and all of that. We weren't to eat each other. That was part of the fall. Dave.
Fruits of the air. In Ephesians, it says, what does it mean? There's a things for there.
Well, I mean, you're trying to relate that back to Genesis. I think this is an after Genesis thing. Yeah. I mean, again, you'd have to get into some, Pauline theology of how he uses these terms and what he means by it. But it's not, see, if it's very good, this is the thing. If it's very good, you can't have Satan here yet. You can't have Satan's fall at this point. Because if Satan had fallen, then it wouldn't be very good. God would have to be saying all that death, destruction, or turmoil that Satan causes is part of the very good. And that's not, that's not it. That's one of the things with one of the, theories about creation. They have what's called the gap theory, where, people take the division between verses 1 and 2 and say, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then they put a big gap between that and number 2, and where it talks about the darkness and the void and the water. And they say somewhere between chapters 1 and 2, all things kind of went to hell, like that. And that the story after that is God's recreation and, and making up for that destruction. I have this page out. I need to learn how to do the share screen so I can put it up, but you can pass this around. But it's a book out of the Bible, somebody's Bible, Genesis 1 and 2 there. And you can see, well, they can see, you guys can't see, but they've got an actual gap in the page between verses 1 and 2, just to emphasize, emphasize their point. But see, again, you can't have God saying that there's death, destruction, millions of years of, they find cancer tumors in, dinosaur bones or dinosaur flesh that they, but you can't say God superintended over cancer and then called it good. So that takes away from, all of that. So let's see. So then in chapter, let me see where I am here. Oh, wait, I had more stuff. So anyway, to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over it. That's what God has put, us here for. And going back to where it said that, about the food, he's just saying everything has food, provided for it, in there. So what do we do with the fossil discoveries? Well, no, that's a good answer. When they find, and when we watched the movie, is Genesis History. When is that? Not this Tuesday, but the following week from Tuesday. You get a lot of answers to that. But what you get is a lot of speculation and a lot of, wishful thinking. And, I don't think that the scientists are dishonest. A lot of people say, well, you got this dishonesty and wishful thinking. And I don't think that they're dishonest. They're trying to figure it out. But I do think there's a lot of wishful thinking that's in there. And I think that's why they've had so many cases that have turned out to be actual frauds. Some they got the bones in they said, we think it's this old, but some they put together and they, that are actual frauds. And that, that comes from, they've just got to figure out a way to not have it be the Bible, not be the Bible story. Because if you got the Bible story being true, the story of creation being true, then you have to have a God. And then if you have a God, then you have to choose if you're going to obey that God, if you're going to submit yourself to that God, if you're going to worship that God. And most people live in rebellion, to doing that. Pardon? Well, yeah, they rebelled and they were right in the presence of God, like that. So it's not like it's a, a hard thing to do. Now, I was going to say nobody's old enough to, remember the Scopes trial. Anybody know about the Scopes trial though, in Tennessee back in 1920? Huh? Well, see, and this is a good example, because this shows how not only how hard people will fight against the Bible and against God, but how people will back them up even when they're proven wrong. So in the Scopes trial, I think the guy's name was James Scope. I think it was. Anyway, he was a high school teacher, like that. And so whoever didn't like him because he was teaching evolution in school. Okay. But the way the story really goes is that he was approached by the ACLU back then. The ACLU, always goes after people to make a case. They find somebody, they go, this will be a good case. Anyway, they found him. He said later on, James Scopes said later on, he didn't really know if he ever really taught evolution, but he wanted to see what would happen when, the case went on. So they did the case. They were trying him, for teaching evolution. And Williams Jennings Bryant was the prosecuting attorney who was prosecuting him. William Jennings Bryant used to be a Secretary of State. He ran 4 times, I think, for President of the United States, back in the turn of the century, not the turn of our century. And Clarence Darrow was the defense attorney. Like that. I guess he was a real smooth, talker. And anybody ever see the movie Inherit the Wind? That's about the Scopes trial. I think that was Spencer Tracy. I haven't watched it for long. I think it was Spencer Tracy. But anyway, so Clarence Darrow really beat up on Williams Jennings Bryan, who was a real fundamentalist kind of, preacher, which was funny because he didn't believe in 6-day creationism. But anyway, so they go through the trial, and that's what the movie's all about, going through the trial and showing how narrow-minded Christians are and how wrong they are and how they deny science and they do all that. I think at the end of the movie, Scopes wins, and now we get to choose, we get to teach evolution in schools. In reality, in the case, he lost, had to pay a fine, and that was the end of the story. But when they made the movie Inherit the Wind, it shows how Hollywood wants to back up the other side of the story to make it seem to people that they can push, I don't want to say to push evolution, but to push against God. Pardon? Yeah. And on the other side, here's the other side. Churches give in and accommodate these people to get peace. So they go, well, we don't want to seem narrow-minded, so maybe there are a million years. Maybe God used evolution. Maybe there wasn't the 6 days. Maybe there was, just all of these things just so that they get along to get along. And most people don't know. And that's the thing. And Genesis doesn't get taught enough in churches, especially the beginning chapters. I think I said this when we were introduced in chapters 1 through 11. I mean, we see God's power, we see God's creation, we see God creating man. We see all the talk about the 6 days. We see the fall into sin. If we're preaching to people or we're trying to teach people or win people over, and we say, well, because of your sin, Christ died because of your sin. And they go, what's my sin? I mean, they have no background. Where did sin? And we say, well, it's all those bad things you do. And they go, where'd that come from? Like that. But if you go back to, we'll see when we get to Genesis 3, we'll see what sin was and what happened, what the promise was. We even have our doctrine of we're all wearing clothes today, from Genesis 3, where God made clothes for Adam and Eve. We see marriage in those stories. We see the formation of nations in those stories. We see God's wrath, in what is it, 6 through 8, the Noah story. We see God recreating. We see spreading out of nations from the Tower of Babel. We get all this from those first, 11 chapters. And everybody kind of wants to teach it as, I've got here somebody what called it. I don't know anybody familiar with William Lane Craig. He's a real great apologist, defender of the faith, philosopher, probably the greatest living philosopher right now. He calls the first 11 chapters of Genesis mytho-history. It's historical myth. He wrote a book on just recently on finding the historical Jesus, the real Jesus. He was anyway, he was created 750 million years ago to 750,000 years ago to 1 million years ago. And if I ever find my little piece of paper, I'll tell you how he named. But anyway, this is what we go through when we do it. So let's finish in chapter 2. This is another thing. So did you guys get the paper around about the gap theory? Did it go? Okay, that's fine. Anyway, so not only people do that, but even where chapters 1 and 2 get divided, make no sense. When the person, did it, because it goes from, being, to where he says, very good. Let me get this. Where he goes, it's very good to getting into, I lost my page here. Into, thus the heavens, oh, no, yeah, thus the heavens and the earth and all the hosts of them, this is in 1, were finished, and on the 7th day, so I got the 7th day. That should have been in chapter 1. So, oh, in case you need to know something, I dug out another set of my notes, and so I changed my Bible thing to the New King James Version because I didn't want to change those notes. So anyway, so this in chapter 2 on the verses there, it is in the New King James. But anyway, so it says, and it's very good. Did day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, and then we have a chapter break before we get to day 7. The first 3 verses are about day 7, and then it changes stories. And I'm like, that's weird. Yeah. It says, thus the heavens and the earth and all the hosts of them were finished. And on the 7th day, God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. So it says, and he rested on the 7th day, like that. I think you've gotten your notes there, but just off the top of your head. So what do you think he did on the 7th day? I know it says he rested, but I mean, what does that mean for God? God goes, oh, oof, got a little muscle ache here. Creating those dinosaurs, man, those will wear you out. Yeah, see, the rest, I think, lets people get kind of a wrong impression, because we think, like when I leave here today, I'm going to go home and rest. I mean, I'll probably take a nap sometime this afternoon. Now, we're glad that God doesn't do that, right? Like God. I mean, he's like those guys that are spinning. Anybody used to watch on the Ed Sullivan Show, those guys that spin all those plates on the sticks, and they'd be running around and keeping them rotated and stuff like that. That's probably what God has to do to keep everything, everything in order. But it says God did not need to rest on the 7th day because he was tired. He rested to show that his creating work was done, to give a pattern to man regarding the structure of time in a 7-day week, and to give an example of the blessing of rest to man on the 7th day. I was reading somewhere where somebody had compared it to a king. So think of a king back in the olden days when they used to go to war. When would a king rest? When there was peace. He would rest on his throne when there was peace in the kingdom. And I thought that was a good example of God here resting. It is good. It is very good. I've got things running the way, I want them to run until the next day. Like that. So the 7-day week is, here was the thing I found out when I was looking into this. We always think 7-day week is always 7-day week. People have tried over time to change the week. In the French Revolution, they tried to go to a 10-day week. I didn't get too far enough into it as to why, and it failed. But I've read that people have tried to change the order of the week, like that. And then again, there's nothing that talks about a 7-day week other than Scripture. That's the only place where it talks about the origination of that. Right. Do your microphone.
I was interested in finding out where do we get the names of the week. Like, so day 1, day 2, day 3. When do we name Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday? And come to find out that they actually came from the Greek gods. The name came from them. And the Romans established the calendar with the 7 days, but actually the Egyptians had a 10-day week or 7-day week.
You know, the thing to look for, excuse me, thing to look for would be, what are the Hebrew days?
Women who created the 7 days.
Pardon, Chris?
No, I'm
Oh, I
fine.
think. You know, what did the Hebrews call the days? And what were they naming them after? Because I doubt they were naming them after Greek gods. Pardon? Give him a microphone so that here.
I believe that originally the calendar was a 10-month calendar. And the Romans put in July and August for Julius and Augustus Caesar. So that's how you ended up with 12 months.
It could be, you know, the thing is, you see, the Greeks used the Julian calendar. In fact, today is Easter for the Eastern Orthodox Church. You know, I mean, they're always, I think they time it. I think they time it right. They keep it right at Passover. This year we happen to hit Passover, you know, but some years we're 4 weeks from Passover, like that. But anyway, but they used the Julian calendar. I think I used the Julian calendar when I was in the Army. You know, when I used to have to keep records. Yeah, and I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember much, you know, about it. But so yeah, because see, the scriptures say that the sun and the moon and the stars were created to measure the seasons. We know that we do our months by somebody does the months by the moon, probably the Jews. The Hebrew calendar is based on the lunar calendar. We're based on the solar calendar, which probably goes back to the Greek and their sun god and, you know, all of that. So we've probably messed things up and made it harder on ourselves. But we have what we have because, you know, we as the church are just pilgrims. We're just passing through. You know, we have no real attachment to culture and society. That isn't true right now today, because today the church just tries to grab onto power and, you know, wants to have that influence in the government and this and that. But that's not the way it is. We're pilgrims just passing through. So if we're in one culture, we can do things that the culture does, you know, because that's the way to operate and stuff like that. You're just not tied to it. What were you going to say, Joe?
Well, it said the Hebrew calendar is what's called a lunisolar calendar, meaning that the months are based on the lunar months, but the years are based on the solar years.
You know what? To them, I'm sure it is. You know, now the thing is that Western culture has, you know, infiltrated everything. So everybody, you know, does things the way that the West does. Even in Israel, it's the year 5783 today in Israel. But I'm sure that they write on their documents and stuff like that, 2023, on things that are going to go outside. They recognize that you have to deal within that. Hudson.
Praise God, we're in Arizona where we don't have to change
The
clock.
clock. Yeah, no, yeah. But those are all based on custom, you know. So, but Ray, that's your job. You look up the names of the months that the Hebrews called the months. Yeah, and see, because yeah, if we're going to say that the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday have reference to Greek gods and goddesses and stuff like that, and they probably do. It's because the Greeks had influenced the culture. We had read when we studied Daniel and Master's Men a couple of years ago, the influence that the Hellenists, the Greeks, had on the Hebrews in Israel, because they were part of that Greek culture. And so then they pick it out. Hang on just a second, Danny. When the apostles in Acts 6, when the people came to the apostles and said, hey, there's fighting amongst the women here, between the Hellenistic women and the Jewish women. They're all Jews, but the Hellenist women were the ones that came out of a Greek culture. And that, so it shows how how culture infiltrates, everything. Okay, now Denny.
The Native American tribes, America. I wonder what calendar they use. We have used to be a minister at our church back home. We went to work and served the reservation. And he used to say, well, there's our time and he said Indian time. We have our time, Indians have their time. Just because the intention to when you show up and service. But I wonder what calendar long ago the Native American tribes used.
You have Google. You can.
Yeah,
This is a great age we live in, because you can Google anything in real time while you're discussing it. I'm going to be discussing it. Pastor's going to tell us. I can see him clicking on his phone there.
When you're asking what are Hebrew days of the week, it's interesting that they, just Googling it, they use the Genesis name, first day.
Oh, there you go. See?
Yom Rishon,
Yeah.
day 1, day 2, day 3. So.
There you go. So yeah, so it's interesting. Now, see, people in the past probably didn't ask questions like this just because they had to work hard. And they didn't have time, and they got home, they ate dinner, went to bed, got up at sunrise, did the same thing. We have so much time on our hands, and it's not bad. It's good. We sit and we wonder, but now God has given us the technology to be able to look things up, like I say, in real time. I think it's amazing. Diane.
I read that, or night was the first to be made. Darkness was first to be made, then the day. Who decided to make day first?
Well, again, it goes back to culture, because you got to remember, a whole bunch of the world wasn't influenced by the Bible or Jewish culture. The Jewish day starts at sunset. So they still do it that way, So the rest of us pagans who got saved by the mercy of God, went with all that other stuff that culture had changed. I'm sure that it probably, who picked midnight? Why not pick sunrise as the beginning of the beginning of the day? We don't know. But your point's very good. If we go back to the Bible, we should say, okay, in God's world, the day starts at sunset. But because I live here in Lake Havasu, and like Hudson said, we're glad we don't have to change our clocks. I go by what the Havasumians, say. And something with Denny's thing about the Native Americans, being politically correct here, about the Native Americans, maybe they don't care what month it is. Maybe that's never entered their, it's planting season, it's the rainy season, it's the harvest season, and then it's cold and we hibernate. And that's what that, that's what that could be. Now, white man exploring could have given them calendars and said, we're going to be back here in March. I don't know how to relate that to you. So here's a pocket calendar that you can, so you can watch and you'll know when we're gonna, when we're going to return. But no, Diane's point is very good. We're going to go by what the Bible says, and we're going to go by the creation story. We should say in God's time, sunset is the beginning of the day. So let's see. God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. In it, he rested from all of his work. I've got the note here. It says in your notes there, it says, though God rested on the seventh day of creation, he did not institute the Sabbath or show us his rest for his own sake. So whatever he's doing on the Sabbath and resting from his work, he's doing it not for himself, but he's doing it for us. It says, because, where'd I have that? For his sake, God does not take the Sabbath off. Jesus himself said, my Father has been working until now, and I have been working. That's in John chapter 5. So it's not like God's twiddling his thumbs, off on a Bahama cruise or something like that. He's doing his work, what he has rested from. I think Ashley said it was his creative work, his creation work that he's resting from. So he doesn't need a day off. But man needs a day off. And I think I'd mentioned before, and we'll say it another time, in the 10 Commandments, one of those commandments about, for 6 days you shall, work, and on the seventh day rest, because in 6 days I created, the heavens and earth, whatever he said, there I created there. So that's where he's instituting, those things. Let's see. So it said, God bless the seventh day. We just went over that. Because of it, in it, he rested from all his work, which he had created. I wanted to stop there. I wanted to talk about one other thing here, is that, so we, through all this, because now we're in chapter 2, through all this, we've talked about 6-day creation, God creating everything. My position is there's no millions of years. It's just the way that the Bible says it. If people want to compete with science and they want to take the view of science, then they're going to have to not take the view of, of the Bible. And people will try to do that, and they'll tell you why it works out. Even that guy who made the gap in the, what's the LCMS's position? Since we're all LCMSers here, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. What's the official position of the synod on creation? Huh? Yeah. Well, so the thing is that in the brief statement, it's a list of doctrinal positions of the Missouri Synod written in this is from 1932. It says on creation, it says, we teach that God has created heaven and earth, and that in the manner and in the space of time recorded in the Holy Scriptures, especially Genesis 1 and 2, namely by his almighty creative word, and in 6 days. We reject, this is important, this is one way that Lutherans state things, goes back to the Augsburg Confession, the Formula of Concord. They say, this is what people are teaching, but this is what we believe, and this is what we reject. We don't just leave it at, this is what we believe, take it or leave it. We always have to put in there, and we reject all this other stuff. So he says, we reject every doctrine which denies or limits the work of creation as taught in Scripture. In our days, it is denied or limited by those who assert abstemiously, in deference to science, that the world came into existence through a process of evolution. That is, that it has, in immense periods of time, developed more or less of itself, Since no man was present when it pleased God to create the world, we must look for a reliable account of creation to God's own record, found in God's own book, the Bible. We accept God's own record with full confidence and confess with Luther's catechism, I believe that God has made me and all creatures. So this was stated in 1932. Pardon? Oh, so, but then they had to restate it in like 1973. And then in the 80s, they had to restate it. You know why they have to restate it? Because people start getting jelly-legged about it, and then churches won't teach the hard doctrine of creation. And so some of the churches will start teaching, well, evolution's possible. They'll talk about the gap theory. They'll talk about, all kinds of, different things. And so then the church has to tighten up to, to do that. At the convention that Jim represented us at, they restated it. How'd you vote? He voted for it. Okay. He wouldn't tell us if he didn't, not after what I just said. No, but they had to bring it up. This was in 2019. And it says, resolve that pastors and other church workers, this is their little bit of a jelly leg, okay? That other church workers be encouraged to confess, witness to, and uphold in their teachings the synod's publicly stated positions as set forth in the brief statement of the doctrinal position of the Missouri Synod, Article 5. And then it goes through and it says what I just read about the other thing. Now, this is one thing about the LCMS, if you don't know. The LCMS isn't like a Catholic church. They can't just drop bombs and make you do things. I think it's in the 7th article of the Constitution, where they say they're just an advisory group. Now they do what they can to try to influence what's, taught, and they have for years. So it says, so we encourage pastors, and then it goes on to talk about what it was. And then it lists what they actually did there, which I'm sure Jim could report on to us. No. But that's important to know. That's what the Missouri Synod position is. That's what I'm sure that the bulk of Christianity always believed, at least up until the Enlightenment. When was the Enlightenment? 17th century? Late 1600s? I don't know, it's when everybody thought they were too smart for their pants. But anyway, since then, everything's been kind of up for grabs. And so then you have people trying to, draw it back and all that. So I didn't want you to think that I make this up, and that, it is my opinion, but I agree with the LCMS and their opinion. Lida.
You have verses from the Old Testament, and then you have the verses from the New Testament, and that's just, that's proving it, because they're both things.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Bible says the same thing from start to finish. It may use different language, it may use different contexts, but what it's going to say in chapter 3, and then we'll finish with this. What it's going to say in chapter 3 after the fall, and we're in 3:15, where God makes the promise to send one who's going to crush Satan's head, but have his heel bruised. That's Jesus. That's for salvation. Is that string that goes throughout the whole Bible that comes to fruition on the cross. Same story. Like I say, there's different things in the background. I've said this before. The story of the Bible is like a play, and Jesus is at center stage. And anything else that's happening in the Bible is the background players, background scenery. But the only thing that happens that matters is that Jesus is at center stage. Okay, and like I say, that's what goes through the Bible. Okay. Oh, Pastor, yeah.
Just the to continue on that proclamation of the gospel, think of Good Friday, sixth day. Jesus said, "It's finished."
Yeah.
His work was done, and then he rested in the tomb.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's all that same pattern. And going to your message to show you that I listened. No, but going to your message where it talks about we're in a world of chaos. But if you read the scriptures, there's not that chaos there. If you read it properly, it's not that chaos there. It's just the salvation story, just marching through the scriptures, marching through our lives, marching through our classes here, marching through our sermons, marching through our day-to-day living as we as the church interact with other people. And that gets rid of that chaos. So anyway, so no class next week. We're going to finish all of chapter 2 when we come back. We're going to speed it up a little bit, like that. I took a long time with the creation because I think that the creation story gets overlooked a lot. We got God creating on 7 days, but let's move on to the interesting stuff. Arlene. That's right. We need to sing happy birthday to Pastor Callio. Somebody nudge him so he knows that we're going to sing to him. No, for you. To you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Pastor Callio. Happy birthday to you. Hey. Yeah. In a couple of weeks, we'll have him report on his experience in the Garden of Eden. Yeah. No, very good. What's that? Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we all stand and we'll close with the Lord's Prayer? Okay. Let me